Water.
Oh, a glass of water?
Oops, wrong show. Thankfully. As I was saying, water. It covers 71% of the Earth. It makes up 60% of our bodies. It is absolutely essential to life as we know it. And yet, for something so important, there are a lot of myths and misconceptions surrounding the subject of hydration. And this is a timely video because it's about 95 degrees in here. You'd think that questions about what to drink and how much to drink would be pretty well answered by now, but the answers to some of those questions may surprise you, or at least not be as simple as you always thought. So sit back, grab a drink of literally anything, and watch as we talk about facts about hydration that don't hold water. Don't hold water. Ugh. These titles are just getting worse and worse. Okay, let's start with the most common one. You need to drink at least 8 glasses of water every day. Now this is true, but also misleading. Your body will lose, on average, anywhere from 40 to 800 milliliters of water every day through what's called insensible water loss, which includes water that evaporates from your skin, your nose, your mouth, etc. Now you'll also lose a lot more water, like 1 to 2,000 milliliters a day, through urination and excretion. Now you do need to maintain an adequate amount of water in your blood vessels, your cells, and your tissues, but you do need to excrete water every day because that's how your body gets rid of waste products. It also helps regulate your electrolytes, such as sodium and potassium, which we'll talk about a little more later on. But do you need to sit and chug 64 ounces of just water? Not really, no. That much water won't hurt you, but you don't necessarily need to force yourself to drink all that water, especially if you're not feeling thirsty. The current guidelines recommend a fluid intake of 91 ounces a day for women and 125 ounces a day for men. Now note that I said fluid intake and not water intake, although technically water is the fluid we're talking about. It just doesn't need to be in this form. A good amount of the water that you need and get every day should come from foods. Fruits and vegetables are especially high in water, and frankly, most of us could stand to eat a few more of those every day anyway. But many foods do have at least some water content. Other beverages like milk, juice, even soda and alcohol also have some water content in them and do contribute to your daily fluid intake. They just get a little more complicated, but we'll be discussing that in a little bit. So what makes this guideline so misleading? Well, mainly that it's a very general guideline, not a solid set-in-stone fact. It's commonly misinterpreted to mean that on top of your food intake, and in addition to whatever else you've had to drink throughout the day, regardless of the climate you live in or your level of physical activity, you are also, for some reason, required to force another 8 glasses of water down your gullet every day or face dire consequences. In some circumstances, that 8 glass a day rule may not even be enough, like say for someone who has a very physically active lifestyle, lives in a hot, dry climate, and has a high sodium diet. A better rule of thumb is to drink water or another fluid with every meal, and try to drink some water between each meal as well, or whenever you feel thirsty. Like, duh, drink when you're thirsty. In short, my main gripe with this piece of generally good advice is that it turned into this dogmatic gospel truth among people who didn't even really understand it in the first place. Some people even went so far as to say that for everything you drink that isn't water, especially something like soda or beer, you need to drink an additional glass of water for every soda or beer that you've had, and that's really not necessary. In some cases, it could even be dangerous, which brings us to our next fact to debunk, that there's no such thing as too much hydration. This is false. Now, I should probably qualify that by saying that overhydration or fluid overload is not that common unless you have certain underlying medical conditions. But to be fair,
To be fair.
Well, to be fair.
they are pretty common underlying medical conditions, such as diabetes, heart failure, kidney disease, and cirrhosis of the liver, all of which require you to carefully monitor your fluid intake. However, drinking too much water can even cause problems in otherwise healthy people. In 2007, a woman in California died after drinking almost 2 gallons of water in a short space of time as part of a contest to win a gaming system. The contest was called Hold Your Wee for a Wee, which would honestly be hilarious, except that someone died. It also happened in 2005 to a college student who was forced to drink massive quantities of water as part of a hazing ritual. The result is called water intoxication, and what happens is that with so much extra water in your system, it dilutes other essential elements in your body, especially sodium. Now, the amount of water and sodium between your bloodstream and your cells needs to be constantly balanced and maintained, and your body is very efficient at doing this. If you remember learning about osmosis somewhere around the 6th grade, you remember that water flows from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration, and that process is happening between our cells and tissues and our bloodstream constantly. With too much water in your system, a few things begin to happen. One is that water will try to rush out of your bloodstream by rushing into the nearest cells. This causes cells and tissues to swell. Cells can swell so much that they burst. Obviously, it's bad to have large quantities of cells bursting throughout your body. But even if the cells remain intact, they're still very swollen with water, and the space outside the cells also fills with water, causing the whole tissue to swell. This happens a lot in muscle tissues because they have a lot of blood vessels running through them, and especially in the legs due to gravity. But when any tissue swells up too much, the swelling can cut off the blood flow. If the blood flow is cut off for too long, the tissues die, leading to gangrene and necrosis. Again, obviously bad. But I'll spare you from any pictures of ischemic, necrotic, and gangrenous tissue. However, the greater danger is that the water will try to rush into areas that already contain fluid, like the abdominal cavity, which can lead to extreme pain and a high risk of perforation and infection. But even worse is when the water tries to rush into your cranium, the area around your brain. Increased intracranial pressure is what ultimately makes water intoxication so fatal. It results in drowsiness, respiratory depression, and impaired nervous system functions. When your brain isn't working, it takes everything else down with it. So, is any of that going to happen because you drank a few extra glasses of water today? Almost certainly not. For one thing, in the 2 cases I cited before, they drank way more water than the average person would in a short amount of time. For another, they were forbidden to go and pee it out, which of course is your body's first response to fluid overload. In short, if you have an underlying medical condition that requires you to limit your fluids, you'll probably know about it before you're in imminent danger of water intoxication. And if you're otherwise healthy, you'd have to work pretty hard to drink enough water in order to cause it. Although athletes, especially marathon runners, are at a higher risk because of their training. Speaking of athletes, let's move on to our next myth. Sports drinks hydrate better than water. Now this is false, but a little bit kinda true. Sports drinks do contain electrolytes and vitamins that can be lost through perspiration and urination, and while sports drinks do replenish those substances, they do not technically hydrate any better than water.
Gatorade not only quenches your thirst better, it tastes better too, idiot. Gatorade.
H2O!
Water sucks. It really, really sucks.
Well, they may taste better, but it's because they contain sugar, which your body will want to try to flush out of your system by diverting water from the cells into the bloodstream so that you'll pee more and get that excess sugar out. Now, because of that, sports drinks aren't necessarily that good at hydrating in the strictest sense, but they do contain electrolytes, and that will help keep your electrolytes balanced if you're chugging tons of fluid. Now, as I said just now about athletes being at a higher risk of water intoxication by chugging tons of water, that problem will be slightly alleviated by chugging tons of sports drinks or something like Pedialyte instead. On a side note, the sugar in sports drinks isn't all that bad because it does help with energy and recovery in a way that plain water does not. But again, we're talking about athletes who are engaging in rigorous, prolonged physical activity, not the average couch potato. So that's sports drinks. What about other drinks? You may have heard that drinking caffeine and alcohol makes you more dehydrated. That's mostly false. Okay, to explain this, I have to explain a little bit about the kidneys and the hormone called antidiuretic hormone, or ADH. The kidneys act like filters for the blood, and they help regulate how much water remains in your bloodstream and how much gets excreted out in urine. It's a complex process, but I'm going to try and sum it up for you as simply as I can.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
As blood passes through the kidneys, water, electrolytes, and waste products are separated out. The kidneys are full of tubules, which pass by tiny little blood vessels called capillaries. The capillaries, as well as a larger duct called the loop of Henle, are covered in semi-permeable membranes, which means that they're full of holes. And those holes allow water to be returned into those capillaries to go back into the bloodstream. Antidiuretic hormone, which is produced in the pituitary gland all the way up in the brain, controls how many of the holes in those semi-permeable membranes get opened up, which controls how much water gets reabsorbed into the bloodstream and how much continues onto the bladder to get peed out. If a lot of those holes are closed, water is not being reabsorbed into the blood, so a lot of it will pass on into your urine, and your urine will be very dilute and therefore lighter in color. If a lot of those holes are open, more of the water is going into the blood and not into your urine, so your urine will be darker and more concentrated. There are certain diseases, like diabetes insipidus or syndrome of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone, that affect this process, and certain chemicals affect it as well, such as caffeine and alcohol. Both of these substances block the production of ADH in the pituitary gland and also block its action in the kidneys.
Not today.
This means that even if you're dehydrated and your body needs to be reabsorbing some water into the bloodstream, some of those holes in the membrane are going to remain closed because the ADH can't do its job as effectively. Basically, caffeinated or alcoholic drinks will make you pee more than you would if you just drank water. However, their effect really isn't that strong. Some ADH is still working, so you will still be reabsorbing some of that water, and even caffeinated and alcoholic drinks do have water content in them.
These kids haven't had more than 3 drinks each. Plus, there's so much water in them, they're probably more hydrated than they ever have been in their entire lives.
Unless you're drinking large amounts of hard liquor neat, the net effect of drinking booze, or soda, is usually still positive hydration. In other words, you're still absorbing more water than you're losing. Those drinks just aren't nearly as effective at hydrating as drinks that have no caffeine or alcohol in them. Even with soda, which not only has caffeine but also massive amounts of sugar, you'll still be more hydrated after drinking one, not more dehydrated. But you may have heard that it's not just the caffeine and alcohol in soda and beer that makes them dehydrating. It's also been claimed that carbonation is to blame, and that therefore carbonated beverages, even carbonated water, is ineffective at hydration. That's straight false. Studies have concluded that carbonation alone has zero effect on water's ability to hydrate the body. Drinking 8 ounces of carbonated water is exactly the same as drinking 8 ounces of still water. However, we have to make sure that we're talking about plain carbonated water, because many carbonated beverages have hidden sugars and caffeine in them that reduce its hydrating efficiency, so you have to make sure you're checking those labels. Now, if, like me, you're addicted to soda with all of its sugar and caffeine, cans of chilled carbonated water can be a good bridge to drinking less soda and more water. It's got the right size and shape and feel to it, and even the fizziness to kind of trick you into thinking that you're drinking a soda. Ugh, until the taste hits you. Nah, honestly, it's not that bad, but it's more like beer than soda. So what about other drinks? Have you ever heard that milk is better at hydrating than water? Sounds kind of weird, but oddly enough, this appears to be true. Chemically speaking, milk is mostly composed of water, along with fat, protein, lactose, and various vitamins and minerals, including electrolytes. But it's the protein content that really makes the difference here. Milk contains various proteins, including this guy, albumin. In medical settings, albumin is used as a blood plasma volume expander because it has an uncanny knack for drawing water to itself. Where albumin goes, water follows. So when you drink milk, you're also getting albumin, and it takes the body longer to process, break down, and excrete protein chains than it does for water. So you have the albumin in your system for longer, which means that you're holding on to water for longer, which means that you're staying hydrated for longer than if you just drank water, which you'll almost immediately pee right out. Okay, so we've arrived at the last one we're going to cover. If your job involves manual labor, especially if you have to work outside in the summertime, then you've probably seen these charts in the bathroom that tell you how hydrated or dehydrated you are based on your urine color, because many people say that urine color is the best way to gauge hydration status. Now this is largely true, but can also be false. So as we've seen from discussing caffeine and alcohol, there are substances that affect ADH production and function in the body, and they make you pee out more water than you would normally otherwise. This can dilute your urine and make it lighter in color. So if you're working out in the hot sun all day, but you're drinking nothing but soda or beer, and you go in for a bathroom break and you notice that your urine is pretty clear or very light colored, you might think, based on this chart, that you're very well hydrated, but that may not be the case. You just have artificially diluted urine. You're probably not dying of dehydration if you've been drinking something, but still, use your head and drink actual water if you've been sweating a lot. It's just simpler. Okay, that's the end of all that. I know this was a long one, and I apologize. Talking this much always makes me thirsty, so I'm gonna go grab another drink, and I recommend that you do the same. But before you go out and grab some liquid, why don't you do me a solid and hit those like and subscribe buttons. I hope you're enjoying this channel, and that we see you all here next time.